Dear survivors of the Shoah, special guests, learned rabbis, ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Ossip and I'm President of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies. On behalf of the board, the JCA, the Sydney Jewish Museum, the Australian Association of Jewish Holocaust Survivors and Descendants, Courage to Care, and Youth Here, I'm honoured to welcome you to this year's commemoration of Kristallnacht and to thank you for your attendance. Let me firstly begin by recognising the survivors of the Shoah who have graced us with their presence here tonight. We are privileged to have you with us, and we both recognise and honour you. I also acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet, and I pay my respects to elders both past and present. We are very honoured this evening to be joined by a number of special guests, including the Honourable Yasmin Catley MP, Minister for Police and Member for Swansea. And Yasmin has come all the way from Swansea this afternoon, especially to be with us after the events of yesterday. So thank you, Minister. Dr. Marjorie O'Neill MP, Parliamentary Secretary for Transport and Member for Coogee. The Honourable Damien Tudorhope, MLC, Leader of the Opposition in the Upper House. Kelly Sloan MP, Member for Vaucluse and a champion of our community. The Honourable Susan Carter, MLC. The Honourable Jackie Munro, MLC. Matt Cross, MP, Member for Davidson. And David Moncrief, MP, Federal Member for Hughes. Every one of the politicians that I've just named and welcomed here tonight are regular attendees at Jewish communal events and functions, and I want to thank each of you. We don't take your continued support and friendship for granted. I also acknowledge councillors from Ku-ring-gai, Randwick, Waverley, Wallara, Bayside and Georges Rivers councils, consuls general from Germany, Hungary, Austria, El Salvador, and consular representation from the UK, representatives from our friends in the interfaith and NGO communities, including the Ethnic Communities Council of New South Wales and Multicultural New South Wales, Gillian Siegel, Special Envoy to Combat Antisemitism, and rabbis and leaders of Jewish communal organisations, schools and synagogues, including Ian Sandler, President of JCA, for whom, without JCA's financial support, events like tonight would simply not be possible. I'd also like to particularly welcome our keynote speaker for this evening, Emil Sherman. Emil was the producer of the film One Life, a biographical drama based on the true story of British humanitarian Sir Nicholas Winton and his rescue of 669 children through the Kindertransport. There could be no more relevant or appropriate speaker to address the theme of this year's commemoration, from Kristallnacht to Kindertransport. Thank you, Emil. Friends, tonight exactly marks 87 years since the Kristallnacht pogrom. 87 years since that dark night of shattered glass and broken hearts. 87 years since more than 200 synagogues were set ablaze, 7,000 Jewish businesses were vandalised and burned down, 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps, and 91 Jews were murdered in a depraved frenzy of antisemitism across Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland. The broken glass that littered the streets after Kristallnacht reflected not only the flames of burning synagogues and broken shopfronts, but the shattering of centuries of Jewish life in Europe. It was the moment when state-sponsored discrimination fully transitioned into unrestrained persecution, and when hatred turned to violence sanctioned by the state. The mask of German civilization had slipped, and within 7 years, 6 million European Jews had been murdered, and once thriving Jewish communities throughout the continent had been consigned to history. In Britain, news of the destruction of Kristallnacht moved ordinary people to compassion. Churches, civic groups, and Jewish organisations frantically pressed the government to act. Within weeks after Kristallnacht, the British cabinet had agreed to admit unaccompanied Jewish children on temporary visas, a rescue operation that became known as the Kindertransport. The British government, though, refused to absorb Jewish adult refugees on the basis that such an action would inflame domestic anti-Semitism in Britain. Britain's Home Office and Foreign Office were also dominated by officials who favoured appeasement towards Nazi Germany, and they feared that taking in large numbers of Jewish refugees would provoke Hitler or create diplomatic complications. So they restricted the rescue to children and argued that it was a temporary humanitarian response to Kristallnacht rather than a long-term immigration commitment. The children of the Kindertransport were admitted on the understanding that, 1, they would not become permanent residents of Britain, 2, no parents or relatives could accompany them, and 3, that their care and costs would be privately funded and no government expense would be spent on them. The British government required that a £50 guarantee, which was a large sum at that time, be deposited for each child to ensure that they would not become, quote, a public charge. Charities and Jewish organisations, not the British government, had to raise the money. But still, as we will hear tonight, between December 1938 and the outbreak of war in September 1939, nearly 10,000 Jewish children were brought to safety in the United Kingdom, from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. The children of the Kindertransport arrived in Britain by train and by ship, carrying small suitcases, name tags pinned to their coats, and hope written into their names. Behind them stood parents who had made an impossible choice. And this is what I want to focus on. The parents who placed their very own children on trains or boats bound for an unknown country, to be cared for by strangers who they would never meet. What clarity, what instinct told them that this was the moment to act, to send their sons and daughters away, knowing perhaps deep inside that they might never be reunited? How did they know that this was the moment, that the level of danger had reached such a point that sending their children away was the only chance that those kids would survive? We know now, looking back, that Kristallnacht represented the final warning sign before the Shoah. But how did those mothers and fathers sense what others could not yet see and determine that such dramatic measures were necessary? Perhaps it was the sight of their synagogues in ashes, perhaps the silence of neighbours who had once greeted them but now scorned them, perhaps the swastikas in shop windows, the orders on the radio, the Nazi soldiers walking in the streets, the sudden, chilling certainty that the world they'd once known was gone for good. Those parents did not know what was to come, not yet, but at that stage they knew enough. As Dave Smith from the Communal Security Trust in the UK said when he was the keynote speaker at this event a couple of years ago, when it comes to anti-Semitism, nothing is ever really new. And the question that the parents of the Kindertransport children had to confront is a question that Jewish communities throughout the ages, facing pogroms, inquisitions, crusades, farhoods, have had to ask themselves. Born out of Jewish history, and our current context is a far, far away from Europe in the 1930s. We are blessed to have robust bipartisan support here in New South Wales and law enforcement agencies who deeply care about our well-being. But it is now undeniable that Jewish communities across the diaspora, and including here in New South Wales, are living through a precarious moment. That the decades-long holiday from Jewish history that we enjoyed in the aftermath of the Shoah is finally over. As we meet this evening, we reflect on the gathering of emboldened neo-Nazis outside New South Wales Parliament yesterday, where they proudly and in carefully coded language called for the abolition of lobby, a legally convenient way of making their intentions about the Jewish community as a whole known. They were brazen and prominent in a way which would have been unthinkable until very recently. We reflect on the re-emergence and mainstreaming of traditional anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, whether it's Greens politician Jenny Leong, who speaks of the tentacles of the Jewish lobby and wants to call us out and expose us as though we have something to hide, or former Premier and Foreign Minister Bob Carr, who claims that democracy has been distorted because, quote, instead of considering our foreign policy priorities and interests, we're swayed to take account of the desires of the Jewish community, as though we, as Jewish Australians, as Australian citizens, are not entitled to participate in the political process, or that we intend to subvert this country that we love. We reflect on parts of the progressive left who are determined to ostracize and castigate any Zionist, which, for more than 90% of our community, is core to our identity and religion. That candidates for the board of the Mardi Gras, a great symbol and event of inclusion and love, are now running on a platform of not of how they will improve the Mardi Gras, but how they will deal with Zionists. We reflect on religious extremists in this city who use their pulpits to dehumanize our community and explain away, sanction, or encourage acts of violence against us. We reflect on parts of the right, both here and overseas, who have fallen under the spell of influences like Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, or Nick Fuentes, and want to ascribe all of the world's ills to the malign influence of the Jews. We reflect on the cesspool, and it's a true cesspool, of conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism online. Have a look for yourself. Any post or news story on social media which remotely, even tangentially, relates to the Jewish community invariably has to have comments turned off below because of the vile responses which would otherwise come. As Prime Minister Albanese said recently, he could post on any topic under the sun on his social media, including saying good morning, and a torrent of anti-Semitic responses would flow. And I could go on. I haven't even touched on the Summer of Terror or other events which have taken place locally. But what I've briefly mentioned gives you a flavour of the moment we are dealing with. And I think we all feel it in our bones, that this is a precarious moment, a time of change, a fork in the road. And for the first time in 8 decades, the questions which have faced our predecessors may once again have to be asked. As I said last year, since the end of the Second World War, and particularly in recent decades, Jewish communities around the world have held events commemorating the Shoah to remember our murdered family members, to recognize the strength and fortitude of those who survived, and mourn the lost worlds of Jewish life. We have waxed lyrical at these events about the universal lessons of the Shoah, and in a complacent refrain, based confidently on the rebirth of Jewish life, we've exclaimed, never again. I've been attending these events for much of my life, but only in recent times have I realized that these events, that an event like tonight, is not just a memorial or a commemoration. For the Jewish community, it is a warning. And that is why tonight's Kristallnacht commemoration is more relevant than ever, and why I thank you all for being here. Friends, tonight we remember the night of broken glass and the Kindertransport, and honour those brave and selfless parents who heeded that warning 78 years ago and made the unimaginable choice, who said goodbye so that their children might live. We honour the rescuers who stood up when the world stood still, and we remember the 6 million who perished. Among them, the mothers and fathers whose parting act of love gave life to a generation, and the 1.5 million children for whom there was no escape. May their memory be a blessing. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is a profound honour to speak tonight in tribute to Yvonne Engelman OAM, a Holocaust survivor, a fierce educator, the heart of our family, and most importantly to me, my gorgeous Nan. Zichronah livracha. I want to acknowledge that many of you here tonight have heard Nan's story before or knew her personally. You carry your own memories of her warmth, her strength, her humour, her unwavering commitment to truth. I speak tonight not only on behalf of our family, but in honour of the shared connection so many of us feel to her. Nan was just a child when her world was shattered. Born in 1927 in Dovha, Czechoslovakia, she was an only child and grandchild, surrounded by love and tradition. But at age 16, she was deported to Auschwitz with her parents. Her parents and grandmother were sent to the left, and she was sent to the right. That was the last time she saw them. In the final days of her life in May this year, Nan spoke of that moment, the last time she saw her parents and grandmother. That memory stayed with her forever. She had always dreamed of seeing them again. And as she lived her final days in this world, that's what she was fantasizing about, reuniting with them, holding their hands once more. Auschwitz was a hellhole. She endured starvation, cruelty, freezing cold temperatures, and the constant threat of death. Prisoners were stripped of their names, their dignity, and their humanity. Nan lived in overcrowded barracks, slept on wooden planks without blankets, and was given barely enough food to survive. Disease was rampant and violence was routine. But through it all, she held on to one single powerful promise, one that she made to her father before they were separated. Of course, I will survive. It was more than a vow, it became her guiding light. In the darkest moments, that promise gave her strength, purpose, and the will to live. Nan's story is one of resilience. Not only did she endure the cruelty and hardship of Auschwitz, but her suffering did not end there. As the Allied forces advanced, Nan was transported to a labour camp where she was forced to work in an ammunition factory, assembling clocks for time bombs. Conditions were brutal. She contracted scarlet fever and, despite her illness, was given no medical care. As the Nazis began evacuating camps, Nan was sent on death marches, enduring freezing temperatures, starvation, and exhaustion. Yet she kept walking, driven by the promise she had made to her father. On the 8th of May 1945, Nan was finally liberated by the Russian army. She was just 17 years old. She arrived in Australia in 1948, penniless and alone, determined to rebuild. She married John Engelman, also a survivor, in what became the first wedding of Holocaust orphans in Australia. Together, they raised a family without extended relatives, just each other and the strength of their love. But Nan's legacy extends far beyond survival. She was deeply passionate about sharing her story, not just with students, but with the wider community. For over 30 years, she volunteered weekly at the Sydney Jewish Museum, speaking to over 100,000 students and adults. Her determination to educate only grew stronger with age. She believed deeply in the power of truth and memory, and her motivation to speak out intensified as the years went on. After October 7, 2023, as antisemitism began to rise here in Australia, Nan felt an even greater urgency to speak the truth, to remember the past and to ensure that such hatred would never be repeated. She was heartbroken by what she saw, but she remained strong and resolute. This added fuel to her mission. Remarkably, Nan continued to speak to audiences until just 10 days before her passing. She believed, if I, as a witness to the atrocities of the Holocaust, do not speak up, who will? And she lived by that principle. She spoke not to dwell in the darkness, but to shine a light. Her message was always one of hope, dignity, and the importance of standing up for what is right. She taught children that knowledge is power and that silence in the face of injustice is never an option. Even after her passing, Nan continues to educate. Through the Dimensions in Testimony project, her interactive biography lives on at the Sydney Jewish Museum. Visitors can ask her questions and hear her responses, just as she was sitting with them. For our family, this is deeply moving. It means that her voice, her wisdom, and her warmth will continue to touch lives for generations to come. To us, Nan was more than a survivor. She was our mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. She was our storyteller, our moral compass. She loved fiercely, laughed often, and never let the horrors she endured define her spirit. She lived with gratitude, pride, and a deep sense of purpose. Now that she has passed, I believe it is my duty and honour to carry on the flame, to continue educating the community about the atrocities of the Holocaust, and more importantly for our family, to keep Nan's legacy, life lessons, and messages of resilience, hope, and faith alive. Tonight, as we commemorate Kristallnacht and reflect on the Kindertransport, we remember that Nan too was a child when her life was upended. Her survival was a miracle, her life was a triumph, and her legacy is a gift. May we honour her by continuing her mission to educate, to remember, and to ensure that such darkness never falls again. Thank you.
They can do anything to you, but they cannot break your spirit. They never succeeded to break my spirit because I had a promise which I wanted to fulfill. Promise to my dad that I will survive, and I did. I have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. I have got 7 grandsons and 2 granddaughters. And I have got 70 great-grandchildren. An only child, an only survivor. I am the victor. I survived. I have 4 generations, and I had an opportunity which Australia gave us to start a new life. I will never forget it, and put some roots down and try to regain faith and human nature. I am definitely not a hero. I'm a very humble person that I have got the ability still at my young age to contribute to this world, tell the young people what it really was, which no book can do. There was the 75th anniversary of liberation of Austria, which was the 27th of January. I was invited by the Shaw Foundation as a survivor, so all of my 3 kids came, their spouses, and 2 of my grandsons. So when I stood there in Auschwitz, I said to myself, well, Hitler, you have definitely not achieved what you set out. I'm here with my children, my family, and I have survived.
Tonight, 6 memorial candles will be lit, some by relatives of children who were saved on the Kindertransport, and some by the Kinder themselves.
As girls 12 and 13, we stand for the children who were sent away by their parents, carried by hope, guided by courage, and holding on to the promise of a safe future.
For the first candle, we are honouring Rita Newell. Rita was born Rita Brauman on November 10, 1926, in Cologne, Germany, where she lived a happy childhood prior to Nazi rule. In 1933, anti-Jewish legislation meant Rita and her fellow Jewish students had to leave their local school for a Jewish-only one. At 13, her older brother Heinz was sent to England in 1934 for school, later joining the British Army. In the early hours of November 10, 1938, Rita's 12th birthday, a family friend who was a member of the Nazi Party rang with an ominous message. He told them to leave immediately for his country house as Kristallnacht was underway and synagogues had been set alight. Before they could leave, Nazis arrived at their front door. Rita and her parents were ordered upstairs while SS soldiers demolished everything in the house, leaving it uninhabitable. On the cold, foggy morning of November 17, just 1 week after Kristallnacht, 12-year-old Rita was picked up by a family friend, along with 5 other young Jewish children, and driven to Holland. After 8 months in a children's home, she was sent to England on the Kindertransport, living with several families, and later in a Jewish girls' hostel until the war ended. Rita was reunited with her parents and brother in Brussels after the war. Her parents survived by crossing illegally into Belgium, where they secretly lived for 7 years. Rita and her parents obtained visas to Australia while her brother stayed in Belgium. On February 7, 1947, they boarded a ship to Marseille, arriving in Sydney Harbour on March 16 to begin a new life, far from war-torn Europe. In 1953, Rita met Eli Niewodowski from Białystok, Poland, by then known as Alan Newell. He arrived in Melbourne in 1948, the sole survivor of his entire family. They married in 1954 in Melbourne, then moved to Sydney, where they became deeply involved in the Jewish community. They had 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and now 2 great-grandchildren. Rita passed away on the 25th of July this year. Tomorrow would have been her 99th birthday. Rita's daughter, Sonia Newell, will light the memorial candle. She is accompanied by Zoe Greenfield, who is 12 years old, the same age that Rita was when her parents sent her on the Kindertransport.
Regina was born Regina Morgenstein on August 15, 1924, in Baarich, a small shtetl in Poland. The family moved to Vienna in 1931, where they opened a kitchenware shop. On Kristallnacht, the shop was looted and smeared with black paint, reading Jud raus, Jews get out. Soon, Mendel, Regina's father, moved to Warsaw to escape danger. Her mother decided the best thing for her 3 youngest children was to put them on a Kindertransport. Only Regina boarded the train for England on December 10, 1938. Around 500 Jewish children were on this train. Then the boat took them across the English Channel, eventually arriving at Liverpool Street Station, London. She was fostered by a loving Anglican priest, Mr. Butling, and his family in West Hartlepool. Regina kept in contact with them until she died. At 18, Regina joined the Royal Air Force and was recruited by MI6 for the Enigma code-breaking scheme, bilingual in German and English. She led teams of men and women intercepting coded German Luftwaffe radio messages. These were then decoded and sent to Churchill's war cabinet to decide which battles British forces would engage in. Regina rose to the title Lance Sergeant Regina Morgenstern, RAF Enigma. She was one of about 1,000 Kinder who served in the British and American Allied forces during World War II. She married William Mercer in 1948 and moved to Australia in 1951. They had 3 children and 10 grandchildren. Regina passed away in 2001. Regina's daughter, Janet Mercer, who's the head of the Australian chapter of Kindertransport Association, will light the memorial candle. She's accompanied by Ava Gerber, who was 14 years old, the same age that Regina was when her mother sent her on the Kindertransport.
For the third candle, we are honouring Beata Hammett. Beata was born Beata Bear on May 9, 1929. It was probably the destruction of the Prince Regent Street Synagogue on November 9, 1938 that triggered Beata's parents' decision to send her on the Kindertransport to England. Then, aged 9, Beata had watched with her mother the smoking ruin of the synagogue, which had been the jewel in the crown of her father Alexander Bear's work as chief architect for the Jewish community in Berlin. The Nazis had already fetched her father from his home to witness the torching of his prized edifice. Beata recalls how, on April 19, 1939, weeping families clustered at the railway station around the children they had little hope of seeing again. The train ended in Hamburg, where they boarded a ship for Southampton, then another train to London. Unlike many, Beata's parents knew which family she would be sent to. Her mother had corresponded in limited English with Beata's future foster mother, the wife of the headmaster of a small country school. From the time she arrived at her cold and unfamiliar new home, Beata found integration difficult. She was expected to call her foster parents Mummy and Daddy and to take their surname, intended to make her feel part of the family, instead created identity issues, especially when she was still writing in German to her parents in Berlin. Compounding her identity issues, she was taken with her foster parents to church, but later spent weekends at a Jewish hostel to keep her in touch with her roots. From 1941, communication with Germany ceased, and Beata stopped receiving letters from her parents. She later learned that her mother died of cancer in 1941, and her father had been deported to Theresienstadt in 1943, where he died of starvation a year later. After the war, Beata lived in the hostel until relatives helped her migrate to Australia. On October 8, 1947, aged 18, she left for Sydney, where she still lives today, aged 96. Beata's cousin, Anthony Coleman, will light the memorial candle. He is accompanied by Hannah Enoch, who is 9 years old, the same age that Beata was when her parents sent her on the Kindertransport.
For the fourth candle, we are honouring Rosa Hausmann. Rosa Hausmann was born on the 15th of October 1923 to an Orthodox Jewish family in Dresden, Germany. Rosa had just turned 15 when, on the 9th of November 1938, her synagogue was burned to the ground. Her uncles were seized and the family clothing business was smashed. On that night of Kristallnacht, Rosa's mother Hannah was looking after 3 children, Rosa, Siegfried and Joseph. Rosa's father Abraham had recently died in a diabetic coma, leaving Hannah with no income and no way to escape Germany. The children were imprisoned in the apartment because it was unsafe to go out. On the 7th of December 1938, a man from the local Gemeinde Jewish Council knocked at Hannah's door and told her there was a place on the train the next day for one child. That child would be sent via Holland to England on the Kindertransport to live with a foster family until Hannah and the other children could join. Hannah chose Rosa, the eldest, to go. In Britain, Rosa lived with a Jewish foster family until the war started, when she lost all contact with her family. Wanting to help the war effort, she travelled to Derby to train as a nurse. By the end of the war, she was fully qualified and hoped to bring her mother and brothers to England. Her desperate efforts to find her family failed, and in 1954, Rosa heard that all of them were dead. Feeling nowhere was home, she saw an ad for free travel to Australia to work as a nurse and seized the opportunity. In Melbourne, she met and married scientist Len Hogan. They had 2 daughters, Annette and Sandra. In 1994, Rosa discovered her eldest brother Max had survived the Holocaust and was living in Israel. They were joyfully reunited. Len died in 2000. Rosa lives in Brisbane and is surrounded by 3 grandsons and 6 great-grandchildren who love and care for her. Last month, she celebrated her 102nd birthday. Rosa's daughter, Sandra Hogan, will light the memorial candle. She's accompanied by Raylia Raskin, who is 15 years old, the same age that Rosa was when her mother was sent on the Kindertransport.
For the 5th candle, we are honouring Marion Paul. Marion was born Marion Ehrlich in Wanfried, Germany on June 30, 1930. Following the Kristallnacht pogrom, her father Paul was interned at Buchenwald concentration camp. The terrible treatment and starvation there convinced him he had to get his family out of Germany. They had no visas for America or England. Marion's mother Hilda heard that if she could get her daughters, Marion and Ingrid, to Berlin a boat, the Europa would travel from Germany to London and then incredibly via Fremantle to Melbourne. The Kindertransport journey was organised by the Australian Jewish Welfare Society, rescuing 17 Jewish children. Marion was 8 and Ingrid 9 when they said their final goodbyes to their parents. They arrived in Melbourne on July 24, 1939, and moved to Lorino Home, a Jewish home for children brought from Germany. They remained at Lorino for 7 years, and their surname was anglicised from Ehrlich to Earl. Back in Germany, Marion's father secured a visa to Shanghai. Once the war began, Marion's mother smuggled herself through Siberia to join her husband. The parents stayed in Shanghai for 7 years, unable to get visas to Australia. Finally reaching Melbourne in 1949, the reunited family later moved to Sydney, where both Marion and Ingrid were married and had families. Marion has 2 daughters, Tanya and Debbie, 4 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. She is 95 years old and well. Marion will light the memorial candle. She is accompanied by Yasmin Patterson, who was 8 years old, the same age that Marion was when her parents sent her on the Kindertransport.
For the sixth candle, we are honouring Susie Stubbe. Susie was born Susie Rosanus in Vienna on the 1st of May 1930. As an only child, she was adored by her parents and had a happy childhood, attending the local Jewish primary school. She recalls little of Nazi Vienna, except that it was frightening to be Jewish. Anti-Semitic graffiti and damaged shops made that clear. Susie's father had often disappeared for weeks, her mother often saying he had gone away for work as a salesman, but Susie later realised he was likely arrested for being Jewish. When the Nazis came to Vienna, Susie's Jewish school was closed. Her parents were arranging for her to join the Kindertransport to London. They told her she was going on a short holiday, though it was no adventure for an 8-year-old. At the Vienna's railway station, Susie's parents told her, "Don't be scared, we will be together again soon," and that her aunt and cousins were in London to meet her. Before boarding, she received a large cardboard name tag to wear on the trip. She remembers following other children onto the train, with Susie and her parents all crying. The train journey was long and frightening, travelling through the dark and as she cried most of the way. She recalls arriving at a huge station in London, surrounded by children wearing name tags to help volunteers guide them. Susie knew no English and stayed briefly with her aunt, who escaped Vienna earlier, before being sent to a Jewish family in Hull. It was difficult with no shared language or other children, but she attended school and quickly learned English. Once war was declared, she moved to a Jewish girls' orphanage in Harrogate, living there until 17, until reuniting with her aunt and cousins in Australia. Susie never saw her parents again. Susie married Gerald Engel and has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. She is now 95 years old. Susie will light the memorial candle. She's accompanied by Ava Nadav, who is 8 years old, the same age that Susie was when her parents sent her on the Kindertransport.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, דיין אלמנות ואבי יתומים, אמצי מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מאירים ומזהירים לנשמות 6,000,000 אחינו ואחיותינו רבבות אלפי ישראל אנשים נשים וטף שנהרגו שנשחטו שנחנקו שנקברה חיים בשום טוב בכל מיני מיתות משונות ולאכזריות בידי הגרמנים הנאצים בעוזריהם ושהולכו לעולמם על קידוש השם ברור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמותיהם לא כן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים וייצור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבותם ונאמר amen.
The words of Kaddish are a praise to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be God, for the gift of life to the holy ones we remember this evening. Please join with me if you wish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma divrach hirutei ve'amlich malchutei B'chayechon v'yomechon Chayei dechol Beit Yisrael Bagala uvizaman kariv ve'imru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam olamei amaya. Yit barach, v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, shemei dekudashah barichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yahei shalama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'meromav u ya'asei shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Please be seated.
Good evening. I would like to begin by thanking my colleagues on the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies Show a Remembrance Committee for their help putting together tonight's commemoration, especially Suzanne Green for managing the event. In 1939, Renata Kress was one of 669 children saved on the Kindertransport by British humanitarian Sir Nicholas Winton. She was on Winton's final train from Prague, and the last child to be taken on board, aged just 5 years and 11 months. Now aged 92, Renata is alive and well, and her family is with us here tonight. In 2023, the story of Sir Nicholas Winton's Kindertransport was made into the acclaimed film One Life. Tonight, we are honoured to welcome One Life's producer, Emil Sherman. Emil Sherman is an Academy Award, BAFTA and Emmy-winning producer. He is co-founder of Australia-UK production powerhouse Seesaw Films. Seesaw's TV series include Emmy Award winners Slow Horses and Heartstopper. Their films have received 30 Academy Award nominations, winning 5, with Lion and The Power of the Dog both nominated for Best Picture Oscars. In 2011, Seesaw's film The King's Speech won the Academy Award for Best Picture, giving Emil the most prestigious award in all of film. Emil is the director of leading film and television cash flow provider Fulcrum Media Finance, a trustee of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and a former director of the Sydney Writers' Festival and the Ethics Centre. He co-hosts popular podcasts Principle of Charity and The Sandbox. Emil will be in conversation with Michaela Kolofsky. Michaela Kolofsky is a Sydney-based interviewer and curator of Writers and Ideas Festivals. Over the years, her interviewees have included Margaret Atwood, Amos Oz, and Marcus Zuzak. She has conducted interviews and presented programs across ABC radio and TV. Michaela is co-presenter and co-writer of a 2-part podcast for ABC Radio National, tracing part of her family's history, called Leia's Way Home. She is the daughter of Stephen, who was born in Warsaw in 1942 and survived and came to Australia. We will now watch the trailer for One Life.
30 seconds to on air!
Okay, and you are just here.
Good night. Sit farther back.
Now, an extraordinary story about a young man who many years ago visited Prague. What he found there were thousands of refugees at the mercy of Hitler's imminent invasion.
Do you ever think about the children and what happened to them?
I bet you got some stories.
That's really not about me.
We are working to evacuate these children by train to safety in Britain.
Why are you doing this, Mr. Winton?
Because I may be able to do something about it. I must.
Go, now.
Nikki, you must know we cannot save them all. You have to forgive yourself that.
I started, so I have to finish it.
We cannot let these people down.
It is incredible what you achieved?
We're doing as much as we can. You have a lot of faith in ordinary people.
Because I'm an ordinary person.
Save one life, save the world.
Forgive me, but how many children are we speaking about?
Can I ask, is there anyone in the audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton?
Please welcome... Please welcome Michaela Kolofsky and the producer of One Life, Emil Sherman.
Good evening, everyone. It is a privilege and an honour to be with you and also to hear about this extraordinary film and the life and work of Nicholas Winton. Emil, I want to dive right in. You worked on this film one way or another for about 15 years.
Yep.
To get this made. What did you see as being at the heart of this story?
Well, firstly, this auditorium is incredible. Haven't been to Mariah. Our kids went to Emmanuel, and I've realised that 200 metres is a very long way.
Yes. We're learning a lot today.
Sorry, what was your question?
You worked on the film for so long,
yeah.
15 years one way or another. And what did you see throughout that process and whether it changed? What was at the heart of the story you wanted to tell?
Well, we came across the clip from the That's Life program. I can't actually see the audience, but I was going to ask how many people had seen that clip. It was an incredibly moving clip. And we saw it, my partner Ian Canning in my company and I, when we were shooting the King's Speech, actually. It was a long time ago. And it's sort of storytelling gold, isn't it? It's sort of the end of a movie. The question is, what is the movie that leads up? What's the story that leads up to that moment? And Ian and I went, we went to go and meet Nicky Winton, which was incredible. We got hold of him. We were shooting the King's Speech. We drove out to Maidenhead, which was a number of hours outside of London, and we were going to pitch ourselves. So we sort of went in, we introduced ourselves, we pitched that we were going to make him famous, we were going to make him a star, we were going to take his story that people just didn't know that well. Sure, it had that clip, but we were going to tell the full story. And he sat there rather uncomfortably and said, but what about the documentary that was made about me? And Ian and I realised we really had not done any homework on this at all. We were just hustling producers, and we were like, of course, the documentary, sure, the documentary, but people in America don't know about your story. And, you know, like the King's Speech, we were hoping we had US distribution. People need to know about this story around the world. He said, well, it was an American documentary.
This is not a good meeting.
And, won all these awards, and everyone knows about it. And we tried a number of things. He wasn't having a bar of it. He thought enough people knew about him. It was embarrassing enough as it was, and no thank you. So we sort of left a bit with the tail between our legs, and it took a little while to convince him, and then his daughter Barbara, who wrote the book about him, that I guess that his story needed to be told. But, you know, when we went out and tried to sell the film to finance it, one of the US distributors that we talked to said, the problem with the script, at that point we had the script and the director and cast, it was like, he doesn't really, he's very reluctant, he's not really a hero. Mm-hmm. And for us, that was the point. That's what we needed to do, is we turned the problem, is we didn't have a hero, because we had someone who just didn't believe that he did anything extraordinary. That became what the film was about.
What did you come to understand when you say that about what motivated him to do what he did? In that beautiful trailer we just saw, he says, I'm an ordinary person. I have faith in ordinary people because that's who I am. But what did you understand after all those years of working on the film, making the film and editing the film, about what drove him to do what he did?
Yeah, I think that's the bit that gives you goosebumps, doesn't it? When you look at that final sequence that we really try to recreate very carefully, that to see someone celebrated who doesn't feel like they should be celebrated is an incredibly emotional thing. So you obviously had all the descendants and the people he saved, in the room at that moment and standing up. But what made it incredibly emotional was that he didn't feel like it was anything extraordinary. And of course there was the extra layer that we can talk about in a bit about how he felt incredible guilt actually for not saving everyone on that last train, the 9th train, the biggest train. So that's what he took through his life, the sense of guilt, not a sense of achievement. But I was reflecting on the film for this commemoration, the Kristallnacht Commemoration this evening, and wondering, in a sense, why this film was chosen. I realised I hadn't actually asked Dane why he was interested in this, because the film contains these two quite different strands. One is an exploration of these incredibly helpless, vulnerable children who needed rescuing as the Nazis were approaching, and it's a story of children being rescued. The other part is actually the lead character is a man who didn't see tribes. He saw humans as humans. And for him, it was basic human decency to go and help where he saw suffering. And I guess I was reflecting on that tension that, I think Rabbi Kamens probably would definitely be able to talk a lot more eloquently on this than me, but just that tension in Judaism between Judaism being that sort of first truly universal religion, or certainly in the West at least, where the God is the God of everyone, and also the fact that the Israelites are a tribe, and that tension between the tribal pull and the universal pull sits, I think, very much within this film. And the core of it, though, and the reason we wanted to tell the story at the time, we always have to think when we're looking to take on a film, what's going to be resonant to audiences today? And at that time, there was a huge number of Syrian refugees. And this is a story about refugees and people in need. And we thought a story about a decent, ordinary person who did the extraordinary and who really didn't think that he deserved recognition or particular praise was an extraordinary story to tell.
Absolutely. There's so many scenes in this film that offer up so many opportunities to respond and reflect on really big philosophical questions. One of the most powerful scenes in the film is where a young Nicholas Winton in Prague goes to meet with a rabbi. So in the scene, Nicholas Winton is trying to collate lists of vulnerable children who could be transported, and no one will give him the lists. But a rabbi will give him a list of young Jewish children. And they have a really powerful discussion about what it means to save a life. Can you tell us a little bit about the conversation between them in the scene and how it's kind of it's at the heart of the film, I think?
Yeah, no, it was, I think, a fantastic scene, and it goes to the question of why he's doing it. And, as we were saying, he's motivated by, I guess, not the tribal impulse and not the desire to have the kids necessarily housed with Jewish families, but it was the desire to save the children in and of themselves. And that question of, we actually looked at changing the title at a point. We thought One Life, maybe we could do better. We ended up not finding a better title, but I personally loved it. I wasn't keen on changing it because it comes from this incredible Talmudic maxim, save one life, save the world, which again holds that this is the strand of the film that we investigated further and further, including through post-production. Like, when is enough enough? And you saw in that trailer there was the scene where his mother, played by Helena Bonham Carter, said, you have to forgive yourself. You can't save everybody. And that question for someone like Nicholas Winton, who he became obsessed. He wanted to save everyone. At what point is enough enough? And obviously, the answer, to the extent there's an answer, the riddle that is the answer is one life is enough. But for him, it wasn't ideological, it was practical. You save one life, and then you save another life, and you save another life. Through the making of the film, And the editing process, you know, we're editing a film at the moment about Tenzing Norgay and the journey up Everest with Emma and Hillary. We're seeing the edit at the moment, and you need to almost rewrite the film at that stage. So we saw the movie, and we realised there was something so powerful in that ninth train that was there in the writing, in the edit, but hadn't been his inability to forgive himself wasn't fully there. Mm-hmm. And we wrote that, and we shot that scene and another scene for the film during post-production to really seed, I guess, his personal arc. He wasn't just someone there trying to save as many children as possible, but he had carried the guilt of that ninth train his whole life. And really it's a story about someone who had to forgive himself for not being able to save everyone, for not being able to save the world.
There are a lot of things that make this film so powerful. The story itself, the person it's based on, but I think a film of this kind of hangs on the performance of the central person. And I do want to just ask you about Anthony Hopkins, about how he approached the character and what responsibility he felt taking on that role. Because in the film as well, his Nicholas Winton, as you describe, is a very reticent sort of man who hardly speaks. But he's just, I think it may be one of the best performances of his I've ever seen.
He has a beautiful performance. I've seen the film so many times as a producer all the way through, and always just mesmerised watching him. Particularly that scene with Jonathan Pryce, the two of them together in that restaurant. Wow, the two of them are incredible. Nicholas Winton's daughter, Barbara, said to us that she wanted Anthony Hopkins to play her father. So, you know...
Done deal. So you can't take credit for good casting choices.
No, well,
really.
I mean, you know, one thing to say that, the next thing to get him, and we didn't know him but never worked with him, and it was, you know, he responded to it. It was very tricky, though, because COVID then struck. It took us a long time to finance this film. Very hard to get all the money together, and then COVID struck. It was postponed. He's of an age, Anthony Hopkins, where he's uninsurable, so we had to take quite a risk to bring him out from LA to the UK, and you know it was a balagan, as they say. But he stuck with it to his absolute credit. I think he was very nervous about catching COVID. We shot it on the tail end of COVID, and we shot his scenes first, and then Johnny Flynn, who plays young Nicholas Winton, shot his scenes in Prague. You know, when there was a lot of work to make it as real as possible. We shot on the actual train station that the children left from in Prague, and Johnny was able to watch Anthony Hopkins' performance and sort of model himself on his intonation and rhythms.
It's beautiful. The photography for the film, as you said, you know, took place just after COVID. I wanted to ask you when the film was released in the UK and how it was received. Well,
we were there, Caroline, my wife, who's in the audience here, and I, it was 2 days after the Hamas attack. We happened to be in London, and the premiere of the film was set to take place at Royal Albert Hall. And, you know, that hall, I don't know how many people, it has thousands of people. There were 20 actual kinder from the trains that he'd ushered in and children he'd saved. There were 200 descendants in the audience. It was the most emotional screening we have ever been to. We were basically half crying and shaking for the entire time, Carrie and I. It was literally 2 days afterwards. I mean, Warner Brothers released it in the UK, and I've got to say they did such a fantastic job, and it was very difficult to navigate that moment. But you know, as time went on and, you know, the release happened there and around the world, we were obviously worried that maybe people were going to not care so much about this story and Jewish kids. But the film did incredibly well at the box office. It did over £10 million in the UK box office. Wow. Sort of over 11 million, 12 million euros in France was the biggest territory, along with the UK, and 50 million around the world. So that was very heartening to know that the story really did connect very deeply, and I think it's because we can all see ourselves into Nicholas Winton. And I remember after that screening, Carrie went to the bathroom along with all the other women wiping away and reapplying, makeup, and she overheard two young women speaking and saying, "We really have to do something." They felt very inspired to help, to volunteer at charities, to get involved, to do, I guess, what Nikki did, which is just try to reduce suffering wherever you can see it.
Mm. When we think about, you work on as you're saying, you're working on so many different films over a long period of time. What are some of the strongest memories that have stayed with you from filming One Life? I know you weren't on set all the time, but what are some of the strongest things for you that remain?
Well, the film, it really had a huge amount of authenticity to it. The director, actually, James Hawes, was fresh off the first season of Slow Horses, so we worked with him on Slow Horses and felt that he, just as a person, was going to be able to bring the tone, because when you cast the director, really you largely, I think, casting for tone, someone who'd be able to hold the sentiment without becoming sentimental. Very difficult thing to do, particularly with a story like this, which has so much sentimentality. Actually, we had to pull back a lot of scenes, actually cut out a number of scenes of the children leaving and the parents crying as they're taken away, because it was too much. And again, to that point around balancing the power and emotion of the children's story with Nicholas Winton's own personal story and the climax in that final scene, which was really about him more than about the children. It was a very delicate thing to get right. I think just, feeling, I guess, proud of the whole team, all the heads of department, everyone really looking at the truth of the costumes, of the design, the way the present story and the past story were conceptualized quite differently. For people who've seen the film, you'll know that the present day is gentle. It's a drama. It's a little quiet. It's not that quick. Mm. And then when we cut to the past, we're sort of in a thriller almost. Mm. And the camera's handheld quite often, and there's a sense of urgency and a ticking clock. So I guess the whole symphony of bringing a film together is incredibly satisfying. And on this one, ending up at that moment in London, that was quite the journey.
Mm. The recreation of that scene, the TV scene, the broadcast of That's Life, is really special. I had seen the original clip, but in the film it's very, very moving. Can you talk a little bit about putting those sequences together?
Well, actually, it was Ian's idea, my partner in Seesaw, to try to get actual descendants, the actual children, to be in the audience. So in that scene in our film, the whole audience did actually owe their lives to Nicholas Winton. Wow. So when it was asked who owes their life to Nicholas Winton, they actually were telling the truth when they stood up. And Anthony Hopkins was not aware that they were descendants until he walked into that room. So, these moments, like going back to that screening at the Royal Albert Hall, at the end, James Hawes asked who in the audience owes their life to Nicholas Winton, and to have 200 people stand up, it was really it was incredibly moving. James Hawes also started his life as a director on That's Life, the TV show. Okay. So, and a lot of the crew had, because it was just a sort of seminal way that people started their life in the industry. So, lots of circles and rhymes across the production.
Yeah. The world has changed since October 7, both inside and outside Jewish communities all over the world. You've spoken already a bit about the things that you noticed about that Nicky Winton, that made it possible for him to do what he did, that drove him, even in very quiet, sort of reticent ways. But I wondered now, in this moment, what are some of the lessons today that we can take away from him and what he did and the example he set?
Well, I guess going back to that first point about tribalism, I mean, this is an event where we affirm a sort of collective identity, and it's so powerful, those candles, those stories, those young readers did such an incredible job, those young girls.
They were incredible.
Thank you for that.
So good.
So you really feel like you're part of a community and a people who have survived and have thrived at the same time. But I think the lesson of the film is really about one life, the other side of the Jewish religion, which is about our obligation to everybody, and the fact that humanity, dignity, God, however you conceive it, rests in everyone, and that the decent thing to do is to care about human beings. And that's very provocative. It was provocative at the time of the Old Testament, of the Torah, and it's still provocative today because we have such incredibly strong tribal instincts. I know I've felt more Jewish and more tribal than I ever have in my life over the last couple of years. So I think what this film reminds me of, and I think the lesson of it is the power of someone like Nicholas Winton, who was able to expand outside of a particular way of seeing the world into, I guess, an appreciation and of everybody, and the need to do something to help wherever he could.
Emil, you made an extraordinary film about an ordinary person, and I want to say congratulations to you and thank you for the film and for reminding us what's possible when we decide to act and when we act together. Thank you all so much for being here today, and please join me in thanking Emil Sherman.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Is there anyone in our audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton? If so, could you stand up, please? Mr. Winton, would you like to turn round? You'll have the chance to meet these people properly after the programme. In the meantime, Mr. Winton, on behalf of all of them, thank you very much indeed.
Can I have the first slide, please? Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen. I'd like to share with you the story of my father, Dr. Peter Henry Springle. I will be talking about his journey on the Czech Kindertransport from Prague to London in 1939 and how I met the man who saved his life. My father was born Petr Jindřich Sprinzels in 1927 to doctors Francis and Vilma Sprinzels in Prague. Here are photos of Francis and Vilma, my grandparents, with their son Peter, my father. Francis and Vilma worked as industrial chemists in the Sprinzels family firm, which imported and exported dried fruits and produce. They developed and improved preserving techniques. My father had a happy childhood. Here are photos of him skiing on holidays with his mother Vilma and Nanny. Their lives were forever changed in 1938 when Germany annexed part of Czechoslovakia, restricting the freedom of the Jewish population and subjecting them to persecution. Fast forward to 2011, when we were going through my late parents' possessions. We came across an envelope marked, label worn when leaving Prague and boarding a train for England. Inside was a cardboard tag, which I have with me here tonight,
My husband Kim's going to show it to you. Do you want to stand in the middle, Kim? This tag is now 86 years old. On the front is typed British Committee Child Transport with a handwritten number, London, and my father's name. On the back is stamped Port Medical Officer Harwich. We were surprised to find out that this was a tag issued by Sir Nicholas Winton and his colleagues. So we realised that my father was one of the 669 children who was rescued from Prague. Thank you, Kim. Next, we looked up the original Winton's list. We found an entry with my father's name, serial number, date of birth, an English school, and my grandfather's name, Francis Sprinzels, as a guarantor. Seeking more information, we contacted the archives of the United Kingdom and Czech Republic. We found out that Francis, my grandfather, had travelled to the UK in early 1939 to expand the family business and decided it was safer to stay rather than return to Prague. He applied for visas for Vilma and Peter to join him, but they did not leave Prague. We know that Francis was based in London, close to where Sir Nicholas Winton was conducting his campaign for the Czech Kindertransport. So Francis personally arranged with Sir Nicholas Winton for Peter to go on one of the trains and paid the £50 guarantee that was required. Before he could leave Prague, Peter required a Gestapo exit permit as well as travel documents. Here we can see the permit was granted on the 27th of May 1939, 5 days before he was due to depart. His date and place of arrival are listed as the 2nd of June 1939 at Harwich. On the 31st of May 1939, Vilma, my grandmother, took my father Peter, who had just turned 12, to the Prague main train station to board the Winton train to London with a tag around his neck. Here is a photo of Peter around that age and his tag numbered 243. Vilma and Peter said goodbye at the train station. Mother and son were never to see each other again. I am wearing the necklace tonight that Vilma gave Peter when they parted at the railway station. So it's on this slide. Now that we knew the dates of my father's journey, we searched for more information to find out which Winton train he was on. This is what we found. The document on the left shows the dates when the 8 trains arrived in London from Prague. As Peter arrived in London on the 2nd of June 1939, this meant that he would have been on the 5th train. We then looked up the list of children on the 5th train as shown on the right. We found my father's name and his number 243 on this list. This train had a total of 123 children who arrived in London via a ferry from the Netherlands 3 days after boarding the train in Prague. Upon arrival in London, Peter was fortunate to have been met by his own father, Francis, unlike the other children who were billeted out to strangers. Peter attended schools in London and later in the Lake District. The surname Sprinzels was changed by deed poll to Springle, my maiden name, in 1947. Peter undertook a bachelor's degree at Cambridge University, where he met Jo Ivetz, who was also undertaking a degree, later to become my mother. After a year at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, my father migrated to Australia in 1949 on a PhD scholarship, and Jo followed soon after. This slide shows Peter and Jo on their wedding day in Melbourne in 1951. My father was awarded his PhD in biochemistry from the University of Melbourne in 1954 when he was 27 years of age. Peter and Jo had 3 children, myself and 2 brothers. They later became doting grandparents of 4 grandchildren. Peter worked as a research scientist at CSIRO in Melbourne and Rockhampton, Queensland. Here is a photo of him at work in the Rockhampton laboratory. Peter published numerous scientific articles and was an ardent environmentalist. Peter went back to Prague in 1983. This slide shows him outside an apartment block where he'd once lived as a young boy. I and my brothers have since visited the same building in Prague. In 2015, I travelled to Prague with my husband and son. We followed the same train journey as Peter had undertaken in 1939 from Prague to London. We visited the statues of Sir Nicholas Winton and the children at both Prague railway station and Liverpool Street Station in London, the beginning and end of Dad's journey. In May 2015, I had the honour and privilege of meeting Sir Nicholas Winton at his home in Maidenhead in the UK, only a short time before he passed away at the age of 106. Although his body was frail, his mind was still sharp. He said he couldn't believe that I'd come all the way from Australia to see him. I was able to personally thank him for rescuing my father and all the other children. And he replied, "Well, someone had to do it." The time I spent with him was a very moving and humbling experience. Without the courageous actions of this wonderful man, I would not be here tonight to tell this story. My father only ever told us that he went on a long train journey with lots of other children. He knew he'd been evacuated, but he did not realise the journey had been organised by Sir Nicholas Winton. We recently came across this photo of Peter with his tag, taken in 1987. Winton's list and scrapbook only became public in 1988. My father passed away the following year in 1989 at the age of 62 after a long battle with cancer. Next slide. My brother Neil and I travelled to Prague in June this year. We laid memorial plaques called Stoppelsteine for Peter's mother Vilma, our grandmother, and Peter's grandmother Anna, our great-grandmother. These brass plaques were placed on the footpath outside their home from where they were taken to concentration camps in 1941. It was an emotional ceremony. Vilma's and Anna's names are immortalised on the walls of the Pinkas Synagogue in Prague as Holocaust victims. In closing, I would like to thank Dane and Suzanne and the Holocaust Remembrance Committee at the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies for inviting me here tonight. On behalf of my late father Peter, it was an honour to attend and have the opportunity to share his story. I would also like to thank my family and friends for supporting me with this presentation. Thank you for listening.
Close every door to me. Hide all the world from me. Bar all the windows and shut out